right. How are international investors viewing the African continent, the landscape, particularly Egypt and Nigeria? I've got a special guest to talk about that. Let's kick off with Egypt. Finance Minister Mohamed Mati has reaffirmed the government's dedication to comprehensive economic reforms aimed at confronting both domestic and international obstacles. The Finance Minister recognized the government's significant achievements in improving, well, that's what the government says, improving the business climate and boosting private sector growth to boost economic dynamics, while speaking at a workshop that was organized by the Middle East Regional Technical Assistance Center, that's METAC, of the International Monetary Fund. In order to attract both domestic and foreign investors, the plan is to increase the inflow of private investment by putting proactive fiscal initiatives into place. We're very happy to have Michael McGaughy. He's the head of research at Fusion Wealth Management Limited, with us to discuss the investment landscape, not just in North Africa, but also Nigeria as well. Michael, you're very welcome. Good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I wanted to start off with Egypt. What's your take on what the government is trying to do there to attract investors like yourself in there?
Any economic reforms, when you have a centrally controlled government like you have in Egypt or even Nigeria, are welcome. One of the questions I think we were going to talk about was what's happening on the ground in terms of foreign direct investment there. We've seen, we've been investing in Egypt for 7 years since the fund started, and we've seen an increasing number of FDI going into Egypt. Most notably, I noticed in the past with our companies, we own a Turkish company called Arçelik, which is rebranding to Beko, and they're building a very big factory there. I think it's a $300 or $400 million investment.
Oh, wow.
To mostly, it's an export factory to manufacture the Beko products, but also supply the Egyptian market. So you do have a lot of progress there, and there's a lot of Chinese manufacturers going in there also.
So you're encouraged by what you're seeing over there?
Very much so. I mean, you have a lot of companies around the world looking for supply chains that are not China, basically diversify their supply chains, because so much in the last 20, 30 years has been worldwide manufacturing has been concentrated in mainland China. So Vietnam was a natural place. Egypt is now giving Vietnam some competition in that respect.
Very interesting. All right, well, you're here in Nigeria. You've also got investments here. What's your portfolio looking like? What kind of sectors are you in?
In Nigeria, we're mostly in consumer sectors. The demographics here are fantastic. A lot of people are having 3 or 4 kids. Nigerians are very productive, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But mostly we're here because the people are really smart. There's a lot of entrepreneurial activity here, a lot of go-getters. The people are really smart here.
Now, there have been a number of challenges. I mean, we've been, talking to you. I was talking to you off air, of course, about the Toleram News taking over Guinness Nigeria PLC from Diageo. The reforms that have taken place so far with the new administration, what do you make of them and the impact that you've seen it have here in Nigeria?
Well, that was one of the key reasons that I've come on this trip, is to find. It's been about a year since the reforms were announced, since Tinubu was inaugurated. And one of the key reasons to come here is to find out what's actually happening on the ground. So when we're based in Hong Kong, and it's good to read about reform. It's almost like textbook stuff. The first 2 weeks after his inauguration was just a field day. Ending the subsidies on oil, freeing up the electricity market, and there were other things that were announced. It's just fantastic news. But at the end of the day, what are the pushbacks like? That's a lot of reforms in a very short period of time. And that's a lot of, freeing up the exchange rate. As we know, the exchange rate's down 70% in US dollars, which for me, paradoxically, is a very good thing, because we are US dollar investors. I'm a big investor in our fund. So it is my own money that I'm putting to work here.
Oh, wow.
So for a US dollar investor like we are, it's a potentially good opportunity, because you have a 70%, all the equities are basically a 70% discount to what they were a year ago. Maybe even more so, because some of the share prices in local currency has gone down. But at the same time, we've been invested in Nigeria for the last 7 years, so we have taken our hit in our portfolio.
Now, can you speak towards patient capital, at least trying to see things smooth over a period of time, while you're in a place like Nigeria or in a Hong Kong that's got tensions with China? What about patient capital?
Capital's patient up to a point.
Right.
We've been patient in Nigeria just because there's always been good value here, and the companies are well managed. You have some really good entrepreneurs on the ground here. You have some MNCs that are mostly doing the right thing. I'm kind of ticked off about what's happened with the Guinness Nigeria thing that was just announced yesterday. It's not in our portfolio anymore, so we won't be affected by that. And I'm also concerned about companies delisting, because when companies delist at a very low price, we could suffer a permanent loss of capital. And that has happened in Egypt. We've had 3 companies in our portfolio that have delisted at a very low price. And that I personally think that's very irresponsible. But I can understand the economic incentives for doing so, at least for the short term.
Right.
But I also think that destroys or really hinders somebody or a group's reputation if they want to come back to the markets later on.
So does that, I mean, if they're taking hits like that, does that then lend credence to diversifying your portfolio? Because if you're in one particular sector and then folks are exiting, then I mean there could be a balancing issue there, right? I mean, how do you see that dynamic working out?
Well, I tend not to think so much of sectors. I tend to think of who's good. So when I go into a country, any country that we look at, our portfolio is set up to take advantage of market dislocations like you have in Nigeria right now.
Yeah.
So we came here in 2017 when the Naira went from 200 to 400 or 450, I forget what it was. Yeah. So again, a 60% discount for US dollar investors. And Nigeria at the time was one of the cheapest markets in the world. And so we look at 3 things when we pick stocks. We look for, is the company managed by good people that have a good reputation that you can trust? Is the company have a good structure where you have a good alignment between majority and minority shareholder interests? Because there's a lot of ways, if you have majority control of a company, to take profits out of that company and put it into the majority shareholders. So we look not just at the listed company itself, but what else do they own? Yeah. What does Tony Emilio own besides Transcorp, for instance?
Right.
And then thirdly, we look at value. And typically when you go into a place that's had a financial crisis or is in a financial crisis, everything's really cheap.
Gotcha.
So it's a good way to buy quality companies, in my opinion, at a very low price.
What about the equity space? As far as the stocks are concerned, because it's up 31% or 33% or so. That's the Nigerian exchange. Are you any interest there, or you're mostly for actual other physical companies that are not listed?
Oh, sorry, we're all listed companies.
All listed companies.
So it's a listed portfolio.
Gotcha.
And that's why you're able to take advantage of these very low discounts.
Yeah.
So it's really attractive here. I've heard that there's a few private transactions that are taking place at market values that are almost double what they are on the listed side.
What about the getting your funds out? I mean, there's of course I know the central bank has made some progress in trying to allow for companies to repatriate their funds out. So you've had any of those challenges in the past? Has that eased up more recently for you?
Well, we're not really traders.
Gotcha.
I really take a lot of my strategies investing in crisis situations.
Yeah.
So best time to invest in Asian assets was during the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And some of those share prices are up over 200 times in US dollars, not including dividends or dividends being reinvested. So just massive, massive returns by investing when and where there's a crisis and holding for a long period of time.
Yeah. Well, so in that case, do you want things to get better? If basically, if you're, spotting opportunity and you're jumping in there, and if things get better, does that flip things around for your portfolio?
No, I'd love for things to get better because we're already invested here.
Right.
And so I'd love for things to get better. I like the announcements that are coming out of the central bank
Government,
here. Cardoso seems to be very independent.
Yeah.
He's making the right moves.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the fiscal follow-up to the monetary policies.
Right.
I'm concerned about security, which was not being reported in the international press. Food inflation being caused by farmers not being able to feel safe doing what they should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so as far as how long you're going to be here, what's your outlook? Are you, as far as for your investments, short term, medium term, long term?
Well, we basically would sell a stock the same reason, or the opposite to the reason we buy it.
Right.
So if the people change in the company, and again, we mostly look at the companies. I don't do a whole lot of macro work.
Oh, okay.
My macro overlay is basically, is this country in a crisis or not? If it's not, then we won't look at it or start to assume a position.
Yeah.
If the country is getting better over time, if the companies are performing, not just the stock price, but if the company's doing well, same management, the management's good, they're being transparent, they're treating minority shareholders well, then we'll stick with the company.
Gotcha. Because as things get better, then the value of your investment gets better as well. Are you looking at any other? You don't want to give away your trades secrets, but what looks encouraging to you? with respect to while you're here?
The consumer sector, again, looks really interesting. Again, I'm concerned about the delisting. Some of the insurance companies look good. We generally don't invest in banks, to be honest with you, because the banks are very, very leveraged. And when you're in a crisis situation, that leverage can go the wrong way for you.
Yeah.
And you also have hidden assets and provisioning to second guess. So generally, don't look at that, but I should probably do that and start looking at that in Nigeria, because they are a big part of the framework here, and the fee income is a big part of their components.
Right.
So they're becoming sorry to interrupt you, but they're not so much interest, traditional banking, but they're very much a fee-oriented service business.
Yeah. And they're the most active sector on the NGX in terms of volumes and so on. Okay, I want to get your take on the whole energy transition narrative. South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria to some extent. We got one electric vehicle charging station in Victoria Island, so we still got a long way to go. Does that look, I guess, promising sometime in the near future? What's your take on the whole energy transition talk and that? Because this is a fossil fuel nation. How do you see things there?
I think you're going to, India's expanding. China's still using a lot more energy. America's still people are just using more and more energy. So I don't think it's a question of just EVs or just ICEs or traditional cars. It's both. You're going to need a lot more energy no matter what happens going forward, I think. An example, we invest in Arçelik or Beko. Their sales are expanding as more people use electronic products. AI is going to need a lot more energy. So we have, in terms of EVs in particular, we have one investment our biggest investment in Egypt is a company called GB Co.
Okay.
And they have the largest market share of cars there. They've been delaying their EV rollout because they say the infrastructure just isn't there yet, and the government policies, at least it sounds, the last thing I read, is not supporting the rollout of the infrastructure in a big way. So I take my cue from them because they know that industry a lot better than I will.
Right.
Yeah, but they're looking at it.
Yeah, indeed. See, I really like your insights. Are you anywhere else on the African continent besides in Egypt and Nigeria? What else? What kind of footprint do you have?
We invest when and where there's a crisis.
Yeah.
And I don't like to have too much exposure. Exposure is fine, but I don't like to have too many investments because it's important to follow. Again, I follow the companies.
Right.
And if you have 6 companies and 6 companies in each of 6 or 7 companies, you're getting up to 36, 42 companies to follow. That's an awful lot,
that is a lot
to follow.
Yeah.
Especially when I want to do a lot of due diligence and on the key owners and make sure that things are going okay.
Yeah.
So right now we're just in Africa. We're just in Egypt and Nigeria. 2 of the biggest countries, and probably I would say some of the most progressive countries.
Yeah.
We miss Kenya. Kenya was a screaming buy about 6-9 months ago.
Right.
But I decided not to look at it just because I had my hands tied with other things.
Fantastic stuff. I wish I had more time. It's really been great talking to you and getting your insights. But I guess in 30 seconds, you're optimistic on future of your investments with where your footprint is in Egypt and Nigeria.
I am, yeah. But a lot of that, the caveat there, and we've got in Nigeria wrong. It's been a worth performing market in our portfolio. So, just as a disclaimer.
Yeah.
But I still like, talking to entrepreneurs here and the owners of businesses. I'm really, really impressed with the people.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing. Everybody talks about how you guys have so much resource. Well, the whole country has a lot of resources, which is great. But if you're not using them productively, if you don't have the people to add value to those resources, then it's not gonna help. But I really like the people.
Yeah. The demographic dividend, as they call it. Michael McGaughy, Head of Research, Fusion Wealth Management. Thank you so much for talking to us on the Global Business Report.
Thanks so much for having me. It's very kind of you.